Thank you for joining us today for Ransomware, the tech industry's cyber crime wave. We're going to give folks a few more minutes to gather here. In the meantime, a few housekeeping details. You can submit your questions for our panelists at any time during our webinar today using the chat box. We'll save time at the end to take your questions, and we have a really good, robust panel on hand to address them, so we're looking forward to that. All right, we have a number of attendees joining right now, just another moment or two before we get started. Great, welcome everyone. Thank you again for joining us today for Ransomware, Tech Industry's Cyber Crime Wave. I'm Louisa Destin, Director and Senior Editor, Enterprise Integrated Marketing, and I'll be your moderator here today. At Travelers, I create articles, videos, and other content to help our tech customers protect their businesses from risks, including cybercrime. I'm joined by a really outstanding panel here today to discuss this important topic. We hope that today's discussion will give tech companies some concrete steps to help protect your data and your business from ransomware. And we've really seen an evolution in ransomware in recent months as attacks have gotten increasingly sophisticated. Ransomware has been described as the new business model for cybercrime, making up 41% of cyber insurance claims for the first half of 2020. And although ransomware attacks are industry agnostic, the tech industry is especially vulnerable given the nature of their business. All right, we have a great panel here today, including Chase Cunningham from Forrester, Sean Hoare, a data breach coach at Lewis Brisbois, and two of our Travelers Tech subject matter experts. I'll go ahead and let our panelists introduce themselves in a moment, but as I mentioned before, please do go ahead and submit your questions as you think of them in the chat box here. We're going to save time at the end to answer questions. And as we go along, you can submit any questions that come to you. We'll also have some trivia questions along the way. So for those of you that got 3 questions right, you'll have a chance for a little gift from Travelers as a token of our appreciation for your engagement and overall cybersecurity wisdom. So stay tuned for that. When it's time for the trivia, there'll be a multiple choice question that will pop up on your screen, and you can click on your desired answer and hit submit. All right, we are ready to get started. I'll let our panelists introduce themselves. Chase, let's start with you.
Hi, sure. So, yep, my name is Chase Cunningham. I'm a VP and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. Primarily, I cover Zero Trust, but I've written books about the subject of ransomware and many, many papers about it.
Great, thank you. Joy?
Hi, I'm Joy Fossey. I'm a claim professional with Travelers, and one of my areas of expertise is cyber claims.
Very good, thanks, Joy. And Sean?
Hi, this is Sean Hoare. I'm the chair of the Data Privacy and Cybersecurity Practice at Lewis Brisbois, and spent much of my adult life as a cyber attorney for US DOJ, working system intrusions with the FBI and Secret Service.
Excellent, thank you. And Kirsten?
Hi, Kirsten Simonson. I manage our Tech E&O and our cyber insurance products and underwriting strategies for technology companies.
Very good, thank you very much. All right, let's get started. So as we think about the ransomware landscape, how have we seen it change over time? Chase, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I was just waiting for, there we go. So this is kind of interesting because really what you see here is, and I remind people this all the time, is ransomware is seen as kind of this like amazing new thing that we never saw coming, and we've never knew that there was this thing in the space. In reality, it's been around since the 90s, 89. I mean, was kind of one of our first instances. Now, if you think about, how long that is, I mean, we're talking 30 years of, more than that, really, if you go back to some of the other instances of where this came from. And the first one was the AIDS Trojan, when someone physically took a disk, stuck it in the mail and sent it to people, and they went, ooh, neat disk, and stuck it in their machine. And sure enough, it bricked the machine. I mean, that was a long time ago. Here we are today, 2019, 2020, when you've got Ryuk and GandCrab and Matrix and Megacortex and all these other things that really are just doing things in a more virtual, cloudy way. We've evolved, but we've only evolved in that the adversary has figured out how to leverage the very same resources we use for business to conduct ransomware attacks. This is not something that is necessarily, totally different than what we've known about. This is just an evolution of tactics in the space. This is the hardest part about ransomware, and I'll show you on the next slide deck or the next graphic, really, is that this is not even necessarily malware. People think that you're looking for this post-quantum encryption, super evil Russian hackery thing. And it's usually not. Most ransomware is an ability to use the installed operating components of a system to do something that it shouldn't do. That's why antivirus doesn't typically pick up on this. Let's go to the next one. This is a booming industry. This is only getting bigger, better, which is not good for those of us on the defensive side. It's very good if you're living in, a former Soviet Socialist Republic area and you feel like driving a Lamborghini. You can go buy one because you probably are making your money off of, sending ransomware through the internet. You can see that the numbers here just continue to hockey stick their way to the right. The one that really blows my mind is every 14 seconds, someone somewhere is getting hit with a ransomware infection. By the time we finish this webinar, there will be a few hundred people that have infected their networks with ransomware. The spread of this and the growth and the ease of use for the adversary is really what people should be most concerned about. The global cybersecurity market is hundreds of billions of dollars, but the global ransomware market is, $21-22 billion by the end of next year.
So it sounds like what you're saying is as technology continues to get sophisticated, the attacks are getting sophisticated almost as a function of that evolution.
Well, and I mean, the attacks are just getting more prolific. The more technology that we put into the space and the more we continue to introduce the same vulnerabilities and the same issues, it just becomes easier. I jokingly say that this is the self-licking ice cream cone of misery. It just continues to go on and on and on. Let's go on to the next one. Ransomware attacks technically are not really that amazing in the way that they conduct their operations. If you think about what actually is required, I always like to deal with the physics of problems, gravity and those types of things. The physics of what is required for ransomware attacks are not that different than what you would have seen back in the 80s or 90s. I mean, really, you look at initial access, it's going to be some sort of RDP, possibly brute force. They're going to find a vulnerable internet-facing system or a weak app, usernames, passwords, those types of things are also thrown into that mix. And they're going to go and crawl through the network, which is where the credential theft and escalation of capabilities goes on. And then they move laterally. And once they get laterally, then they're doing persistence. And then at the end of this thing is when the payload is finally delivered. Now, there's other things that can be done during the mix here that may throw this off a little bit and may show some different tangents on the approach. But in reality, if you went back to that, early graphic and said what happened in, early 90s to now, this same flow is the same thing that have happened. The tactics change and modify a little bit, but the overall requirements, the physics for what takes place to make this happen have not changed. And that honestly is indicative more of a broader problem in the cybersecurity industry, in that we've got hundreds of billions of dollars going into technology to solve this problem, but we don't deal with the physics of the problem. And in other words, we treat the symptoms really, really well. We don't treat the disease. Yeah.
And now, as we see on the next slide, with everyone home or many people working from home, COVID pandemic, that's affecting things as well.
Yeah, I mean, this has exponentially increased the role here. You've probably heard a lot of conversations about zero trust, and zero trust has kind of become the dominant strategy for the space. The global market is moving towards this, and the reason for that is March 13th, 2020 is what I like to call Zero Trust Day. Like, that was the day that the government came out and said COVID is a bad thing. Everybody go work from home. Don't come back to the office. The perimeter died that day. I mean, before that, you could kind of argue that we had sort of you kind of knew what the ins and outs of your infrastructure were. Since then, everyone everywhere is a remote office. Everyone everywhere is piping into their network. If you have a bad username and password, you have a compromised asset, you have an unpatched machine, that is an avenue for compromise into your network. So your perimeter now has dissolved. You must approach it more, more sort of strategically to make sure that you solve back, again, the physics of that problem. And you've got to be looking for what's going on there. I think one of the most important things that folks need to wrap their head around is visibility is absolutely key to knowing what's going on so that you can respond. It does you no good to see a wildfire, raging, 100 miles away if you don't know it's raging, 30 yards behind you. You've got to see what's going on. I think we have a couple more slides here on this whole piece around this space we find ourselves in.
We will do our first poll question first, and then we'll get to that. So get ready, those of you that are watching, to answer. And the question is, the top ransomware variants in 2020 included all of the following except TrickBot, Mirai, Zeus, Doppelpaymer, and CryptoLocker. So go ahead and make your selection, and we'll end the polling after we've had folks weigh in here. All right, I'll go ahead and end the polling here. And the correct answer was CryptoLocker. For those of you that got that, we had pretty evenly split responses. So good job for those of you that got that right. All right, and as we continue on, Tracy really talked about what has changed across the ransomware landscape. Why are tech companies a target for ransomware? And Sean, you might have some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, so tech companies are great avenues of access. I mean, if you go back and look at what happened with Maersk and Norsk Hydro, the initial compromise didn't occur within those organizations. It occurred with someone that they did business with. So, they were basically pushing out, I believe in Maersk, it was a company that was pushing out finance software, accounting software, and they managed to get in there, package their exploits, send it through that, and then it was deployed in that system. Tech companies are great because tech companies are doing techie things, which usually mean you have excess privileges, lots of admin access, capabilities beyond just the average user. So from the red teamer attacker perspective, I'm looking for the easy targets, but I'm also looking for targets that give me maximum return on my investment. Those are going to be tech companies because tech companies can give me access with power. And we won't go into the specific names of the companies here, but just to provide reality. I mean, globally, GPS went down because they were, you can figure out who that company was, but because they got ransomed. I mean, that happened a few weeks ago. And I mean, the U.S. government was losing their mind because GPS wasn't working. That's pretty important. Tech company, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars in cybersecurity ransomed. And the funny thing too is when you look at the actual adversaries in the space, the Maze team, the guys sending out Maze ransomware, they've got their own PR group.
Yeah, so we're looking at a press release right here.
Yeah, they literally have people that will do press releases for them and say like, look, we told you we were going to get you, and you can either pay up or we'll release your information. So they go after whatever they can get to, but they want to go after high value targets. High value targets equal technology.
So if the ransom to run more like professional organizations, like a professional business than they used to be in terms of their organizations.
Yeah, I mean they're run and managed just like a professional organization, and they do everything from recruiting to training to they have their own HR. I mean it's pretty staggering. I think the best one I saw was the folks in I can't remember where it was, but they were having a corporate Christmas party, and part of the door prize was to auction off a Ferrari. Like that's how much money they made.
At Travelers, we talk about how it takes a team to respond to a data breach, and it would seem that if your ransomware attackers have a team, you would at least need one to respond. Sean, what sort of things are you seeing on your side of things? You might need to take yourself off of mute.
Well, while he's doing that, I mean, I'll briefly speak about this ransomware as a service. The other thing to really remember too, like Joy was saying, you used to have to be a computer scientist to do this type of work. You used to have to know how to do exploits and know how to fuzz and whatever else. This is a service. You can go buy GanCrab, and I'm not saying go buy GanCrab, but you can go buy GanCrab for, I think it's $25 on the underground to get your first license. So I'm, to your point, this is an industry that is built around this, and it's a service. You just like you can figure out how to configure AWS with 10 minutes on YouTube, you can figure out how to send exploits through these types of operations and not necessarily have to worry about detection or whatever else unless you kind of screw it up, because it is offered through the cloud as a service, just like a regular company would offer.
Mm-hmm. So given the changing landscape, how has the approach of protecting companies changed, or how does it need to change?
Well, I think what we see is that this is where the ZT side really comes into it, is that you've got to adapt your approach to back to the physics of the problem, right? If you look at what ZT talks about, never trusting, always verifying, and I can tell you this because I wrote books about it. you can go look at the history of exploitation, and what you will see is that it is not usually the super mega post-quantum encryption, crazy NSA hack that causes these massive compromise or ransomware issues. It's usually the basics that are combined in a way to cause those compromises. And if you take the framework that we've created and map that into it, you can see what problems you solve where, right? People, typically accesses and accounts, workloads, clouds and applications that live in the cloud, networks, firewalls and VLANs, devices, IoT, BYOD, data, and then automation and visibility. So the point being that you can't continue to embrace the old approach and think you're going to do anything any better than all those other organizations that failed at it. There are organizations that spent $500 million a year in that old approach and failed. If that's the case, logic dictates we must address things differently. And that is where ZT strategically comes into that place.
Companies are doing business differently now as a result of the pandemic and advances in technology. So it stands to reason that your approach to protecting the company would also need to evolve. So very good, helpful. So let's transition to our next poll question, and then we can talk more about protecting against these attacks. So according to the results from a survey of 200 IT and cybersecurity professionals, what percentage of organizations had a security breach caused by remote workers since the start of the pandemic? And we can see the responses starting to come in here. Give it just another minute before we close the poll here. All right. So the right answer was 20%, and it looks like about half of you got that right. So that is kind of surprising. We'll talk a little bit more why, what the vulnerabilities are and how you can protect yourself going forward, but certainly a different world than it was even 7 months ago. All right, so then how could companies do more to protect against ransomware, especially when it comes to business continuity?
Yeah, so I think where we start, protecting against ransomware, the importance of good cyber hygiene, it continues to be critical. And as was mentioned earlier, technology companies are that access point quite often into a much larger enterprise or fish, so to speak. So this is a great time to step back, take a look, and think about your existing policies and procedures. As an underwriter, I'm looking for several things, but I start with the cyber kill chain. So if you recall a slide that Chase had earlier where he was showing access points as a very starter on it, I'm looking at all of those avenues and what can be done to prevent something from happening. What are those various points where you can stop the malware from getting deeper into the organization? And one of the proactive security measures that I look for includes how strong are their access protocols. And we talk about remote work environment. And so I'm looking for connecting to either a secure network using the company issued VPNs or working more directly into the corporate network. If there's not a corporate issued VPN, that certainly can increase the vulnerability. But these days, I think one of the areas, and this gets into that zero trust, really looking for multi-factor authentication broadly used across the organization. We're starting to see it more commonly for remote access, but it's surprising that we don't see it as common or as frequently used for privilege or admin access, where really you have the keys to the kingdom, right? So what are they doing to make sure that the access to the most privileged of networks, information, whatever it is, how is that separated and segregated from just little old me who needs to get on to do business using the various apps? We also look at what are they doing to monitoring and close things like open remote desktop protocol. And we know that that's pretty much like leaving a window open for a drive-by for someone to see, hey, there's this window open, it's an opportunity to get in, leave something behind, and deploy it later. So, what are they doing to make sure that they have secured the open RDP and SMB and similar? Once you think about, how the network is functioning, we also look at what type of endpoint detection and response tools have been deployed. Now this gives you that opportunity to gauge or look at what is moving around in your network, where is it going, and et cetera. So I think that becomes even more critical as we think about the significant number of the workforce now working remotely. So how are you managing all of those additional access points, endpoints that you didn't have 6, 9, 12 months ago? And then thinking further on that remote workforce, as they're coming back into the organization, you don't know what has happened while that laptop or whatever the device is has been working in a home environment. How are you making sure that once they're connecting directly into that corporate network, it's clean? You're not just taking on something without checking, so to speak.
And we've heard even that in some cases the cyber thieves are waiting until the devices are plugged in. Is that right, Kirsten? And they recognize more opportunity once a device is connected to a corporate network.
Certainly doesn't surprise me. I know we've seen a couple instances of that. Absolutely. Yeah. The other thing, quite frankly, we cannot forget employee training. And, as was talked about, as the criminals continue to ramp up and shift tactics, you think about what you as an employer are doing on a daily basis. And personally, I'm whipping through emails as fast as I can. And am I really paying attention to what is being asked of me and clicking on things? And quite frankly, the phishing emails are getting more and more creative. I have been astonished at some of them that I've seen and going, I don't think I would recognize that if I wasn't just a naturally suspicious person. And I don't trust anybody I don't know, or even people I do know, quite frankly. So the training around how the cyber criminals work and how they might be approaching you and socially engineering you, and how those actions can have an impact is I think, critically important. So now if you assume that you've got some of these critical preventive measures, and that's just kind of a few, there are a lot more that can be taken. Now you think about, okay, business continuity. And so now it's about the preparation to survive an event, right? So really, I look at this as preparing for the catastrophe no different than planning for any other catastrophic event, whether it's a fire, a hurricane, or tornado, whatever it might be. You have to think about how it could significantly impact operations if your network is shut down, you don't have access to your tools, and how are you going to get up and running quickly? So this really means identifying those critical areas and assets that need to remain functioning. So what are those key risk factors? And then making sure you're putting a plan in place to respond. And don't forget to test that plan. I think one of the areas that I can't stress enough, if you expect to rely on backups to maintain operations, you have to be sure those backups are available. And they didn't get encrypted when the ransomware hit as well. So it's going to be a real hard road if the backups are encrypted, or if they're 4 weeks old or 4 months old. So really making sure that those backups are often and they're segmented and offsite from the production. And then, like I said, testing the incident response plan, testing your business continuity plan. And, a little plug, but don't forget to engage your insurance carriers or other vendors that you might have on retainer that have helped you work through this, because they can help with testing those plans and making recommendations and suggestions.
That's all very good advice. And I know one of the things that we talk about here is how a company responds to a data breach can absolutely affect how quickly they recover. So Joy, what are some key steps for a company to take after a breach?
Sure. And I was also going to talk about this event feeling like a catastrophe for most companies who have this happen. And, you know, with catastrophes, some companies think I need to get in touch with my insurance carrier or my insurance broker agent. And some, I think, more sophisticated companies, and maybe particularly technology companies, may want to jump right in to try to solve the problem on their own. And I would just urge that you do involve your carrier as soon as possible, because this is something that I work on day in and day out, and have contacts with breach counsel, with forensic vendors who are ready to jump in immediately to start helping out. So when we first hear of it, we typically do have a conversation with a breach counsel, and that is an attorney or a firm that specializes in cyber events and assisting with those. And with ransomware, I know we didn't touch on this too much, but when somebody's in your system, they may not only be encrypting, but they may be accessing confidential data. So there are other issues to consider that the attorney, the forensics investigation firm can help out with. So I'm talking about like a data breach or something like that.
Notification requirements and those types of things.
Well, just to investigate whether a data breach may have happened. And then if it did, right, then you would have those notification obligations possibly. And that's where the attorney can also assist. And, you know, there are certain variants where, just based on past experience, the forensics firm may know, typically, yes, this one, it also may involve a data breach or a data incident. So that's why it's so important to involve the right vendors from the outset. I also caution using the same vendors who may have helped you with your system, with looking at what happened. If, you know, they, you know, may have configured something, you know, mistakenly, it can sometimes be helpful to just have an outside, you know, uninvolved party taking a look at things. So we'll start off with that call with breach counsel. They typically would retain the forensics investigation firm to protect that attorney-client privilege, and then they would do their investigation. First thing with a ransomware event, they're going to want to see, as Kirsten was talking about, are your backups available? Are they current? Because that may influence your decision whether you would actually consider paying the ransom. It's something you want to also do on the quicker side to the extent possible, because sometimes with the bad actors, if you wait a while before you get back to them, let's say that it takes a while to figure out that the backups are not available, or it's just there's been a delay for whatever reason, and you get back to them 2 weeks later, I've seen the ransom double, or, you know, even more than that, the ransom amount just gets significantly increased, because now they're realizing, oh, they must be desperate. They really want to, you know, get their system back, or now they're realizing their backups are encrypted as well, or aren't available. And so now they need to pay the ransom, and they're going to be paying a lot more.
And that really highlights the value of having that data breach coach relationship that can coordinate your crisis communications firm and your forensics team and all those pieces that you don't want to be trying to, you know, identify and retain in the middle of a potentially, you know, emotional hack experience.
Yeah, it is a catastrophe. It really is.
Yeah.
And so, as I mentioned, if there's a breach notification required, you also want to get vendors involved who can assist on that front. And that forensic investigation firm will give you a report at the end of its findings. And typically, if you've involved breach counsel, they'll give you that final report as well. Sean, I see you've rejoined. I didn't know if you wanted to jump in here at all.
Yeah, I was dealing with Igor over in St. Petersburg, Russia for a couple minutes.
Oh, how fun.
So, yeah. I think, well, I'll just come in here real quickly and just say, you know, it starts with preparation and it ends with preparation. And I was reminded this week of a couple of things that are critical for business. You know, a client I started to help yesterday who had a large incident, and before they really understood what took place, they notified about 50,000 of their members. And they didn't think about the fact that if you're going to notify 50,000 people that something may have happened, you've got to have capacity to respond to those incoming messages. And so they're flooded today with messages and really don't know how to even respond to the communication as we're starting to deploy forensics to see whether they really have something. And so it's just one of those tiny little moving parts that ultimately can become a very big moving part if you don't control it at the outset and manage the messaging. But no, I like we said a couple times here before, the first call should be the broker to the carrier. Hopefully, although I have a dog in this race, the second call perhaps to outside counsel, but then make sure you are working with whomever it is, somebody who's got experience, and then the relationships with forensics firms, especially in the ransomware environment now. It's not it's so critically important to have somebody there. It's a rapid response. An hour or two delay can result in a day or two's worth of downtime, and the revenue you can lose in a day or two in a large corporation can be catastrophic. And it really can come down to that 2 or 3 hour delay on a Saturday morning where you're struggling to figure out where your cyber insurance policy is, who your carrier is, and then how to file a claim and all that sort of thing. But if you've actually practiced, you've got a plan, you've done a tabletop exercise, you have a fluid response, you can reach out and you're going to be on the other side, much more quickly. And I think also we haven't talked about it much. Chase did a wonderful job walking through the evolution, if you will, the history of ransomware. Kirsten, you did a tremendous job. I mean, I felt like I was in a master's class for a little bit until Igor over in St. Petersburg and I started wrestle flying. But it's in the ransomware environment, what's really become dangerous. And when I teach corporate executives about this is that I think the most dangerous environment right now is the exfiltration extortion model, where it's not just data encrypted, where it can literally throttle your business model, but if in fact they're actually stealing your sensitive information as well and then holding you hostage. And that's truly where your cyber insurance component comes back into it, to make sure that you've got the resources you've been paying for, and to make sure that the corporation or the business understands that now is the time to utilize those resources, to bring in the forensics firm immediately to identify what you have or what you don't have. It's going to allow you to determine whether the bad guys are just posturing about stealing stuff, or whether forensically you can corroborate that they really have. And then you can start to rather immediately assess the risk to the organization and get a feel for whether you actually have to, unfortunately, pay the guys who just stole your data, or at least commence communication with them. But I'll stop there and I'll chime in from time to time. Joy, go ahead.
Well, Sean, I'm actually glad you brought that up, because as you both were talking, I realized that has been a growing trend, right? Where we're seeing the exfiltration of data, and then they start actually extorting the owners of that data, which isn't necessarily the first company, the tech company it was breached. It could be their hospital client or their banking client or whatever it is. And now are you also facing a liability situation, which really to me kind of amps up the need of how critically important it is to engage the carrier, the broker, and the breach counsel very, very early on to help assess that situation.
No, absolutely. They can, involving breach counsel right away can alleviate so many headaches down the road. Both of you, I think, mentioned, you've got obviously the third party lawsuit or claim side of it. And then as Sean rightly pointed out, doing things out of order can really throw you off for the long term. The example he gave of doing notifications before you really knew what you were dealing with, and you didn't have the capacity to deal with the questions that would come in. Involving the right people right off the bat can just make things just run more smoothly and orderly, we'll say.
Well, another thing to recognize in this new ransomware environment with the exfiltration extortion model is that these guys are not just programmers who come in and encrypt data and leave. They're going to work your business. They're going to make sure that if you're not communicating with them or you're not, doesn't look like you're ready to come to the table to pay ransom, they're going to start to use the journalists, like the quote, I call them the dark web trolls, as communications or public relations agents for them. They're going to have them start to tweet about the fact that they've stolen some data from you, or they're going to have their own agents or own employees come back and start calling your employees or calling your customers, because of the data they've stolen. They now know who to contact and say, oh, by the way, did you know that this investment company that you've got X, Y, and Z here because I've got your financials? Do you know they've been locked down and we've stolen their data? And all of a sudden, they're going to, those members, those employees, or those clients are going to call you back, and you're going to realize, oh my gosh, I've got to accelerate this. Maybe I do have to pay ransom. But they have layers of let's just say layers, offensive layers to their model, not just the programmers, not just the technology to ultimately do reconnaissance, figure out where the vulnerabilities lie, customize the malware to get in and blow past your AV products and ultimately drop malware in your system. But they're then set up on the outside to start social engineering to get back in if they get locked out, or to start to tweak the communications lines to put pressure on you to negotiate with them. So just recognize this is much more sophisticated than I ever imagined. And there are a lot of moving parts you have to prepare for. You take one step, they're going to be taking another, and you better be 2 or 3 steps down the road. Otherwise you'll get stepped on.
I think this conversation really highlights all of the different aspects that you need to consider in a plan to be prepared before this happens so that you can respond after the fact, which kind of tees up our next poll question. Can you take a look at that? A post-cyber event plan should consider a number of issues. Which one of the following should not be a part of your post-cyber event plan? Give folks just another minute. All right, I'll go ahead and end the polling here. And the right answer, of course, was to set a strategy. That's something that needs to be done, as the conversation we just had just illustrates well in advance that the planning needs to happen well before a ransomware attempt, and ideally that the backups in place would prevent the need from having to deal with the ransomware negotiators in the first place. So at this point, I mentioned in the beginning that we would be taking questions and at the end. So if you haven't had a chance to go ahead and submit your questions, you still have time to do so. And we'll take some from the audience here with our panel. The first one, what mistakes have we seen companies make in responding to a ransomware attack? Sean, you might be well positioned to answer this one.
Yeah, one of the first big mistake is not calling your broker or your carrier immediately. Sometimes we will be called into a matter after a business has been kind of playing with it for a couple of days, thinking that they can get it done, or calling Joe the IT guy or my uncle's neighbor's friend to come in and help out. And again, and every hour delay could result in a couple of days delay. But when you factor, you're not dealing with it with professionals, and so oftentimes the system breakdown gets worse. That could be one big thing. Not calling the broker carrier immediately, not deploying the resources. Another thing is, in addition to notifying the proper people at the outset, sometimes we find that businesses will actually communicate directly with the attacker right off the bat, trying to be proactive. And that's however well-intentioned that might be, sometimes the attackers don't actually know who they've hit. Sometimes they've done a random kind of drive-by. They found a vulnerable port. They've got an IP address, but they don't know much beyond that. They haven't cared much about it because they've got 100 other victims on the line. And yet somebody inside that domain communicates with the attacker from that domain, and all of a sudden that the attackers realize, oh my gosh, we got a big financial services firm on our hands. We're going to ratchet that ransom up. Or some people don't recognize that it's really not a good idea to pay attackers yourself. There are some federal laws to comply with. And so we want to make sure that if in fact you actually are negotiating with an attacker, you're utilizing perhaps a third party that's got a due diligence process set up to actually comply with anti-money laundering and Office of Foreign Asset Control laws. Because if in fact we're paying somebody and we don't know who they are, we might actually be violating federal law. And so again, that's where your cyber insurance carriers come in. They've got preferred providers for that service. And we find that's going to be done much more professionally. You're probably going to get a much better deal if you're negotiating with someone who does that on a regular basis. And you're also going to be compliant with the laws.
Very good. Any others want to chime in on that question?
Yeah, just to, on top of what Sean was saying, you could be compromising your insurance coverage by kind of going rogue on your own. And I'd hate to see that happen for anyone.
Very important point. Thank you, Joy. Our next question, what should companies be doing globally to help protect against ransomware attacks?
Well, I think again, this gets back to engaging the carrier and the broker quickly, because if you need a global response team, and you really do want a global response team, they're well positioned to take that on and make sure that those things run smoothly. I mean, globally, there are so many different laws and regulations and things that have to be thought through in response to that. So that is my biggest piece of advice, is you want to have a globalized response team versus trying to handle it locally and having multiple vendors trying to work the problem, so to speak.
Well, and some of your preferred providers, whether it's a forensics firm or another firm that does collateral threat intelligence, oftentimes you're going to benefit literally from a global resource of intelligence. Maybe it's dark web scanning, maybe it's a forensics firm that's got a variety of branches, a lot of investigators regularly investigating and developing their own libraries of indicators of compromise. They're going to expand well beyond your network, their knowledge. And then also, for instance, if you're going to pay ransom, the Office of Foreign Asset Control came out with guidance recently that strongly suggested, of course, check against the sanctions list, but also report it to the FBI and do it sooner than later. And as it turns out, the FBI does have a task force assigned to each major malware variant, and they are tying into, again, global intelligence that they've learned and others have learned. And ultimately, sometimes they can't necessarily help you in your response to the incident, but there's some intelligence, maybe some indicators of compromise that can help you accelerate your investigation. And so in combination with, again, your forensics firms, maybe dark web scanning through their technology and sources, and the FBI, you can really take advantage of a lot of intelligence far outside your resources.
Helpful, thank you. And potentially also just help build that database within the FBI so they can help track these things and get a handle on it as well. What are carriers doing to assist insureds with paying high ransomware demands when the insured or the client can't pay ransomware upfront?
Again, that gets into all the vendor partners that we work with. I mean, we have those folks in place because they are experienced in negotiating that and have the capabilities to step up when it's needed.
Very good. And this next question, we've heard some examples of attacks, but is there a big trend that any of you are seeing?
Well, I guess I'll pop in. Chase, you might have something to say here too, but what we've seen is that initially we thought it was a kind of scary, 18 months or so ago when we started to see the exfiltration extortion model. But it seems as though in the last 2 to 3 months, almost everybody and their brother is hopping into that model. They previously were known as just an encryption model, and now they're spinning up something else, or they're calling themselves something different, or they're franchising out somebody else's model. And many of the attackers now are using both encryption to extort, but also the exfiltration to extort. And that's, again, it's just such a dangerous model. And the sophisticated actors are also utilizing a few new techniques with some custom code to come in very stealthily. The AV products don't recognize it. They're in your network a little longer than previous. They're able to drop it throughout the network and really take advantage of the entire network. So when they execute the attack, your system is locked up, your backups are wiped, and they've actually stolen all the most sensitive information. And so that's, again, it's a combination of those things that is making that one of the most dangerous attacks I've seen, and we see multiple models right now doing that in tandem.
I mean, if my experience in looking at this side of the market, if you want to solve or at least drastically reduce your risk of being compromised from ransomware, do 3 things right now. Move to a remote browser, do application whitelisting, and mandate multi-factor authentication. If you do those 3 things, you're not going to be perfect, but you won't be the slow gazelle stumbling across the Serengeti. I mean, this does not mean I have to be perfect. I just got to be better than you. And if I do some very simple things, they'll attack you and not me. So you don't have to focus on perfection, but what you should focus on is pushing your users through things that basically make them operate in a fashion where they are not going to be the avenue of compromise. And, yes, I think you should train your people, and yes, you should educate people on what this looks like, but it's very difficult to fix people. I can fix infrastructure, definitely, but you should be leveraging solutions that make it where your users operate in a more secure fashion, but they're not aware that they're actually doing it. That's why I'm a big fan of those things that I talked about. I can push you through a remote browser. You'll never know that you're on, a protected infrastructure, and you just simply can't engage with the content that would cause you a compromise. Like, where could it be more simple?
Right, make it automatic.
Well, another, if you don't mind me mentioning another defensive measure, and it's also a containment measure, is that, you've talked about it multiple times here already, in addition to multi-factor authentication, but it's robust endpoint monitoring. It used to be seen, I think, as a luxury, and now it's a key part of any containment effort to respond to a ransomware event. And now, ever more than before, it's a key defensive part of your layered defense program. And while, again, I say it's a luxury, it used to be seen as a luxury because it's not inexpensive. Now, in order to detect something like a ransomware attack, if you don't have robust endpoint monitoring with what we call heuristic applications, meaning those applications that aren't just going to flag a signature-based piece of malware, something that's already been identified as malicious, but it's going to identify behaviors that appear to be malicious, even if they're with legitimate applications. And without that sort of a tool in your system, malware will get in, ransomware will be executed, you will become a victim. It's going to be far more expensive than to pay that, what used to be discretionary spend. Now I see it as InfoSec 101. Get that in your system now. You're going to monitor all your endpoints. And so in addition to everything else that Chase has talked about, that's going to be your A line of defense. It's going to relatively immediately detect something inside your perimeter, and you're going to be able to shut it down as opposed to becoming a victim.
Yeah, and last thing I'll say too is, having dealt with a bunch of organizations that are responding to this, if someone's coming to you right now and says, I have a solution that will help limit the likelihood of spread of these compromises, and they say it'll cost you X number of dollars now, it's cheaper to pay for the solution that will fix this problem now than it will be when you get ransomed. So don't sit there and go, nah, like, we got this, we're not worried about it, whatever else. You will regret it. I mark my words. So engage in fixing the problem before it becomes a problem.
All right, we'll let that be the last word today. Thank you all for a great discussion and some really hands-on tips about how to avoid a ransomware attack and what to do if one does indeed affect your business. So as we heard today, the idea of being prepared in advance is especially critical. Having a plan and practicing it, having segmented backups that are regularly updated and secured offsite, and having trusted resources in place who can help work on your behalf in the event of a ransomware attack. Well, thank you again, Chase, Sean, Joy, Kirsten. Those are all great discussions today. Thank you for joining us. To all of our attendees, you can learn more at travelers.com or contact your Travelers rep for more information. We'll also be sharing a recording of today's webinar with everyone who registered. And for those of you who participated in the trivia questions and got all three right, we'll follow up with an email with more details about your gift. So from all of us at Travelers, thank you again and take care.